one of the three cases that came before the Supreme Court in 1919 involved a person who gave a speech in Ohio during World War I, and in that speech praised people who had resisted the draft. And for that, he was arrested and prosecuted and convicted of violating the Espionage Act of 1917 for interfering with the draft. And the case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and written unanimous decision by Oliver Wendell Holmes upheld the conviction of this person, and he spent several years in jail. Who was this person? It was Eugene Debs, a candidate for President of the United States from the Socialist Party, who, while in jail in 1920, received over 1 million votes for President of the United States. Now, we don't think of ourselves as a society that convicts presidential candidates for making speeches praising people who violate the law. But that's the way it starts, and it's not a great beginning, but then it picks up, and Oliver Wendell Holmes seems to change position, and it's a fascinating story, but that's not my story of today. By the 1930s, we have a very strong free speech tradition and free press tradition. By the 1950s, it's down again as the McCarthy period leads to the widespread denials of free speech, free press as we know it, among other violations of civil rights. And then comes the 1960s, and in particular, New York Times versus Sullivan, and that is the beginning of the reshaping of American principles of freedom of the press and speech. And New York Times versus Sullivan is known for what it did to libel law. So it basically said that a public official cannot sue for damages the press or citizens for saying false things about them unless the public official can show that it was made with actual malice. That is, the person or the press knew that it was false or acted in reckless disregard of its falsity. And that established a very significant point of constitutional law. But it did more than that. The case did more than that. What it did was really to say, we are a society where the press in particular and citizens play a very, very important sovereign role in our society. And it went on in other cases to define the role of the press as a structural role in our system, a fourth branch of government, not just an ordinary business that happens to produce information. It has a public trust. It also said that this is rooted in our decision to be a democracy, a self-governing society. It also said that we would take free speech and free press to an extreme degree, and that was followed through by other decisions, Pentagon Papers, for example. In the 1970s, the New York Times and the Washington Post receive classified documents known as the Pentagon Papers, and those are taken illegally from the government and handed over to the Washington Post and the New York Times, who very kindly called the Attorney General and say, we're about to publish these, thought you would like to know. And that resulted in a suit for an injunction against publication. And the Supreme Court held that the press has a right under the First Amendment against prior restraints to publish classified documents that have been illegally purloined from the government. That's what the free speech tradition means, and then there are lots of other decisions that reinforce this sense that we are protecting speech and press to an extreme degree.